Hello and welcome to BFM's first Health and Living webinar for 2021. It's been a while since we met on Facebook Live, and of course even longer since we got the chance to meet all of you in an actual physical event. Well, we're in our second pandemic year, so unfortunately face-to-face is not an option right now, but nothing's going to stop us from bringing the spirit of a Health and Living event right to your screens, and most importantly, so that you can continue to hear our conversations about important health issues, and of course, be able to interact with our experts. So we're kicking off another Health and Living webinar series starting this month, April, running right until November. And staunchly staying with us over the years is our sponsor, AIA Berhad. And this series of webinars would not have been possible without their support. Now, if you remember our webinars from last year, it wasn't just about great conversations. There were also great prizes to be won. And we've got more in store for you this year. We have one lucky draw prize to be won every month, and one grand prize at the end of it all, a Samsung Galaxy Watch Active 2 worth 999 ringgit, courtesy of AIA Vitality. Here's how you can participate for the lucky draw. Make sure you watch the full webinar, of course, and then click on the link provided in the Facebook comment section, where you just have to complete an e-registration form and you'll get to download the e-sharing kit. And we have a different one for each webinar as well. For today's webinar, one lucky participant will get to win a Samsung Galaxy Fit 2 courtesy of AIA Vitality. And as a bonus, we're also hosting a live quiz for you to win a Touch and Go voucher and BFM merchandise. All you have to do is follow the steps on the screen, key in the PIN code, which will be given to you later in order to participate. Now, we'll be running this quiz only at the end of the webinar, so make sure you stay with us all the way. We want you to be alongside us to participate in the discussion that we're going to have as well. And what are we going to be talking about today? So, second year of the pandemic, like I said, in a way, we're not meeting at the best of times. Since the beginning of 2021, we've been looking at COVID-19 cases that are in the 4 figures. And this week alone has been quite scary. Rising numbers of cases, more cases in schools, for instance, which has many people worried. At the same time, many of us have been struggling to keep up with the SOPs, that feeling of being constantly on guard and being vigilant against the virus that we all had at the beginning of the pandemic last year. Unfortunately, for some of us, it's wearing out and it's wearing us down as well. Is this something called pandemic fatigue, and what can we do about it? So we've got 2 experts today to help us understand this. We have Public Health Medicine Specialist, Assistant Professor Dr. Farhan Rusli, and also Counselling Psychologist, Shankar Thiruchelvam.
Hello.
To both of you today. How are you?
Hi. We're good, thank you. How are you?
Very well, and looks like you're both excited and raring to go for the discussion. Now, to our viewers, if you have questions for our experts today, you can post them in the comments section, or you can also WhatsApp us if you'd rather stay anonymous. For instance, our WhatsApp number is 011-2571-2689. That number will be posted in our comments section as well. If you don't have questions, but you have thoughts that you'd like to share, your experiences perhaps, how you've been feeling about the pandemic so far, what you've observed about other people's behaviors around you. Are you feeling pandemic fatigue? Do you think it's real? So do share your thoughts with us. Now, Dr. Farhan, I'm going to start with you. We're in the second year of the pandemic. How would you describe people's behaviors right now compared to what we were seeing last year?
Hi, thank you for the question. I think the first thing that we need to address is the increasing number of cases before we touch on how the people are feeling. So year on year, we've actually had 1,000% increase in the number of cases. So where we used to have 200 plus 300 cases, we are now seeing 3,000 cases per day. So this is something that's very worrying. And when we talk about how people are responding or how they are feeling towards the pandemic, it's something that's very subjective. So when you look at people wearing masks, when you look at people following the SOPs, yes, you observe them trying to follow, but what we are seeing is the increased number of cases is because people are only following when they are being seen. I don't know if that makes sense, which means that you only want to show that you're following the SOP, but when you're not when you're not seen, when you're in your workplace, in your pantry, when you are amongst friends and close family, you do not follow or observe the SOP. So this is why you see clusters breaking out, 2/3 of them from workplaces. And we think that this is what happens is because when they meet people who are they familiar with, this notion of, I don't think the person I know could possibly have COVID, right? So this is where they let their guards down, and they mix and mingle freely, and that's why you see a burst in the number of cases. So we think that as much as we see people, we observe people following the SOP, but we also think that once we are not looking at them, we think that they are not following it. And yes, I think the behavior of people have been something where they are getting a bit fed up, they're getting a bit tired, and it's very understandable because this is something that has been prolonging for a long period, right? And people are not able to travel, people are not able to move freely. So the curbs of freedom of movements definitely takes a toll. People get very agitated in a sense.
So you talked about when we choose to let our guard down, and you mentioned certain people that we feel is safer for us to take off our masks and perhaps be fear among them. You mentioned workplaces. Can you give some other examples where this is happening? Because some of us may not actually be aware that what we're doing is risky, Dr. Farhan.
Okay, so recently when the government announced that private sectors are now able to operate at 100% capacity, obviously employers looked at this in a way where if it's allowed now, it's safe, right? But what somebody needs to know is that you have the ability to operate at 100% capacity, but you have to fulfill all the requirements to ensure that your workplace is actually a safe workplace. So what we mean by this is, when you enter your open floor space, do you have any barriers and partitions between your members of staff? Do you ensure that you have proper segregation in the pantry? Do you ensure that when you use the elevator that there's only 2 or 3? How many times have you actually entered an elevator, but because you're all from the same office, you cram in even though there's only 4 spaces, right? I'm sure it has happened to all of us because we think that, you know what, I'm with them anyway, so I don't think something's going to happen or something's going to go wrong. But imagine if the first person who stepped into that elevator was somebody from a different office, and the 6 of you from your office has come in, but the elevator was only meant for 4. So now you've overcapacitated. And the person who overcapacitated the elevator has now contracted the virus from that person who's from a different floor. And when you go back into your office, you spread it out all amongst your colleagues. And this is how we talk about workplace clusters actually starting. And
That's
this is
absolutely
something
terrifying scenario.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, that's an absolutely terrifying scenario. I can just picture the virus sort of like jumping from one person to another,
Yes.
And Shankar,
Yes.
Dr. Farhan used the term fed up. Now, why are people feeling like this? Understanding you understand people's behaviors and psyche and emotions. Why are
Right.
people feeling tired and fed up?
I think one of the key things perhaps is important to consider is a deep sense of loss of normalcy. And based on the situation that we're in, there is a great loss for normalcy. And then after losing normalcy, you get apathetic. You're kind of tired and fed up that I have to constantly do this. And this is against what I've been used to. So the change in normalcy, and at the same time, the sense of apathy that sets in often causes behaviors to regress back. Regress in the sense that, okay, when it first started, I did everything accordingly how the SOP was supposed to be followed and done. Then as it goes along, plus there is an immense amount of misinformation, overload of information about many different sources telling many different things on how you're supposed to cope and manage. Even the whole debate about the vaccine, should you take it, should you not take it, all of that's added into a whole cloud of doubt. And once that persists for a period of time, you're going to have people who start questioning, is this really necessary? Do I really have to do this? And that sort of causes a lot of inconsistencies in how you would go about approaching your day and thereby approaching the SOPs and what you're supposed to follow. So if you're asking me, the shift is, number one, because there is a lack of normalcy and you're tired, and there is an ongoing conflict of information and misinformation that's being bred. And I think that is one of the key factors that we need to address.
So we'll get to the misinformation and sort of the kind of messaging that people are getting in a while.
Sure.
But, Dr. Farhan, one thing that's consistent is that, we haven't strayed from the key core message that COVID-19 is still dangerous. It's still out there, and it's still within our community. We get daily case numbers reported in the media and through social media. Now, how effective are these daily reports when it comes to keeping us on guard about the ever-present danger of COVID-19?
Okay, if you ask me, I think we are in a much critical situation right now compared to where we were a year ago. So now you're looking at overcapacity of our healthcare services. You see our ICU numbers are at record amounts. Those people needing ventilators are reaching its maximum point. You see the number of active cases have not picked up. Our Director General of Health has also announced that, yes, there is a very high possibility we'll be hitting 5,000 cases per day, and I think that will come sooner rather than later. So the people have made it in such a way where it's something where we know it as pandemic fatigue or desensitization. So when you expose someone to something so frequent, they will not be afraid of it. And this is where the challenge actually happens. If we look at countries such as India, where they started rolling out their vaccination policy and their vaccination program, the people started to enjoy themselves, and then they started to go back to normal daily living as though the pandemic was not here, because the vaccines was going to solve every single problem for them under the sun. But we saw now that it's not true. Now their rivers and their mortuaries are actually full. They do not have even enough oxygen to give people. So the backlash is very severe if we think that we are safe now. It's not that I'm trying to instill fear into people, but what I'm trying to deliver is that it is very important that we understand the responsibility of each of us, and we should not depend on the government to be taking care of us. We should understand that we as the people, we have responsibilities that we must do as individuals to keep ourselves safe. So what I mean by this is simple. When you look at the cases of during the fasting month, during the Muslim fasting month, and you look at the bazaar, the Ramadan bazaars, it's very interesting because it's something that's enjoyed by not only the Malay Muslims, but also the Indian community and also the Chinese community, because it is sometimes where you get food where it would be so difficult for you to get before, right? As Malaysians, we enjoy eating, we love going shopping, and every time we do that, we always feast. But when you enter a certain area such as Bazaar Ramadan, and you look at the overcapacity, now you have to be smart in the sense where it's overcapacity now, I don't think I should enter. Because if I enter, I may be the next point source of an outbreak. So these are things that we must take a role, and we must play our part.
Yeah, so you're talking about for all of us to use our common sense, isn't it? At the end of the day, it's about knowing what's right and knowing how to apply it in your situation. But of course, the authorities have had to use things like fines and have increased the fines for those violating SOPs in order to get people to really comply. But Shankar, is there what are your thoughts on using the stick approach to get people to follow SOPs? Using fear as an approach.
Right. I would say that I would be personally conflicted with it if we are using a purely punitive mechanism to get behavioral compliance. I guess the more important question that we need to address is, if there is a failure of compliance, is there a gap in information that's being presented? And if there is a gap of information, what information is missing? Because if we are saying that we're going to use punitive measures, force, like the burger dude who's got $50,000 fine, so on and so forth, and if that's not really working, then we've got to ask another serious question. What's not allowing people to actually comply? And is there a misinformation, or is there a gap of information that needs to be addressed that's causing this sense of disregard or apathy, so to speak? And I think that's something that needs to be addressed. We've got enough information. We have information that's being presented repeatedly, but are the platforms that we're using and the way the information is presented is actually reaching the masses in the way that it should? I think that needs to be looked at.
I
All
completely agree, Shankar, with that. If I just may add,
Sure.
number one, I completely agree with your statement where we should always use the carrot rather than the stick, because what we are trying to achieve in actually providing this sort of solutions for the people to follow, our ultimate goal is making them understand what is actually their role and responsibility. Rather than I'm wearing a mask because I do not want to get fined, but rather knowing I'm wearing a mask because I am actually helping prevent the spread of the virus. That is more important. But what we see now in the society is that a lot of people follow a lot of the SOPs because they do not want to get fined. It only goes a certain way, but when you're looking at behavioral change, when you're looking at to empower people on how they should behave in a safer society, you have to always go on the more subtle and the more carrot approach, right? Making them understand why they should be doing it. And
so what would the carrot approach look like?
A carrot approach would be something whereby it's incentivized. So how we have to look at it is because it's a public health situation. So when you look at the stick, you punish individuals, but you are not progressing the entire community as a whole. But that's ultimately what you want. So imagine, for example, if you talk about the island of Langkawi, where it's a very localized area, or Tioman, and you tell them, if you manage to ensure that you do not have any number of cases in your vicinity, we're going to allow you to be spending time on the beach. You can go for your barbecues. You can go for all your open spaces. But if cases increase, the entire community is actually punished. So in this way, we make them realize that they play a more bigger role rather than just preventing themselves from getting fined, but rather my role is to ensure my community can function in a more open manner, in a more freedom manner, rather than I'm doing this only for myself. Because in the end, it's a public health issue. So we need a public health solution rather than individual targeted fines.
I would
and
agree
rather
completely.
than using fear, because we have Jimmy who's sharing on Facebook with us that living in fear is not the answer, but in a way living without fear is not the answer as well. How do you live knowing that the virus is going to be amongst us for a long time, but at the same time not deprive ourselves from engaging with society, the things make us enjoy life, the social interactions that we are longing so much for? So, on that note, Shankar, how do you see us making that balance so that we can see the light at the end of the tunnel, balancing between not cowering under fines and punishments, but understanding, as you both have already said, understanding that there's a rationale to how we should be behaving.
Right. When I mentioned earlier about there is a deep sense of loss of normalcy, so which means we're saying we have to redefine what normal is. There has to be a redefinition of what normal is, and I think that's probably something to consider. So what is my new normal, so to speak? And how do I assimilate the larger fabric of society and the community into redefining that normality? So if I can take active steps in redefining what is normal to me, as opposed to trying to push and force that normality, things will change. So then the question becomes, what is the new normal? What is the redefinition do I need to do? The new normal would be the XYZ things that I need to do, and I need to be self-regulated and thereby self-responsible and understand what makes this new normal important. Once that clarity is there, then the normality will gradually shift. Now there is the resistance of that normality because of perhaps the way we're going about approaching it. So that is something that we really, really need to look into. So if we come up with, say, a caption, redefine or new normal, and these are the things that we keep repeatedly saying, but what does that actually look like as a family, for a small communal unit? What does that look like as a society, as a community? And once
As a
we
workplace.
exactly, as a community, as a society, and as what Dr. Farhan has said about food in Malaysia, and the fact that we like enjoying and engaging in food related activities, how is that able to make into the new normality? As soon as you say, I can't do this, I can't do that, I can't go out, I can't go and have my normal meal, that's a sense of suffocation. So what that basically means is, if I had the freedom, I may not necessarily go out and do these things. But the very fact that you've taken this away from me and you tell me I can't do it, that frustrates me. So
and I want to go and do it with a vengeance.
exactly.
Yes.
So it's that little transgressions that are important to address and manage, I feel.
Yeah. Just very quickly, if you've just joined us, this is our first Health and Living webinar. I'm speaking to Assistant Professor Dr. Farhan Rusli and Shankar Thiruchelvam about how to beat pandemic fatigue. Now, if you have questions or comments you'd like to share with us, post them in the comments section. You can also WhatsApp 011-2571-2689. And just very quickly, there's a lucky draw prize that you can win at the end of it all. You can download the e-sharing kit at the end of it, and you'll get to win a Samsung Galaxy Fit 2 courtesy of AIA Vitality. Now, I want to come to the point. I think, Shankar, you talked a lot about misinformation and the messaging, and it's sometimes conflicting, so people can't fix in their minds, they can't define for themselves what their new normal or their proper behaviors should be. And we have Anwar who shared with us that, you know, of course, people are fed up with the ever-changing SOPs and unpredictable future, you know, for instance, whether there will be another lockdown. So how can you even plan things like your business in the near term? So Dr. Farhan, when it comes to messaging and the way that SOPs are defined and implemented and enforced, how much of that do you think should be driven by understanding people respond to them individually?
Okay, I think one of the key points here that must be made, and a lot of us must understand, is that as much as we think that the government is making things difficult for us, trust me, we are trying to do everything we can to ensure normalcy is the way that it should be. The thing is, with this pandemic, it's not only affecting Malaysia, it's affecting the whole entire world. And the situation is extremely dynamic. When we talk about SOPs being rolled out and why different SOPs always change, it's because we are trying to tailor-make the SOPs to the current ongoing situation. It's not that we do not have a fixed SOP, but rather we are trying to accommodate as much as possible normalcy into the new derivatives of the new SOP. So that is something that is completely that people must accept. So when the respondent asked about how do you plan business, right? That is something no one is able to answer. And nobody in the world will be able to answer, whether you are in the UK, whether you're in the US, whether you are in any part of the world. Because as much as we plan something today, we might have another lockdown next week. We do not know. Or as much as we plan for something next month, and then a new variant comes up, right? Or we say we have rolled out the vaccines and we have achieved herd immunity. But what if a new strain that is not going to be, that is susceptible to the current vaccinations? So we have to go through another national immunization program that is going to come out again next year. So how do we do that? So the situation is completely dynamic. It's completely ever-changing and evolving. This is something that is completely new to every single person in healthcare and government, because of the way our world works now, because of the globalization, because of the dependence of our economy to other economies, and we understand the frustration of the people. And we know that these are also contributors to why pandemic fatigue actually occurs. It's when businesses get fed up, employers are just frustrated, they start laying off their employees because they just don't know what to do with them anymore. So this is something that it's completely dynamic, and it's something that I will not be able to promise whether you are able to plan something for next week and you can follow through with it. So it's something that's ever changing.
So then each of us needs to have some kind of resilience, right? To ride, to face the ebbs and the flows. And Shankar, what do you think? Because a lot of people are going to think, what's the point of me following anything when it could change the next day? So from an individual perspective, in terms of building resilience, what do you think?
The idea of building resilience basically would imply there is a clarity on why we are doing what we're doing. And the reason of that becomes important is I'm doing this now for my present stated circumstances, which could be today or the next week. And if I have that clarity, I need to engage in these set behaviors for this week or for the next couple of weeks, because it's necessary to ensure that the next couple of months or the next year unfolds effectively, where we can return back to the previous state of normality to some degree. That is what I would say needs to be looked into and implemented. And what Farhan had said, it's impossible to plan for every loophole. And sometimes it's a situational basis and a circumstantial basis. So at points in which, if you looked at last year, they allowed the interstate travel to happen, and that was nice. And then it sort of rise, and we need to curb it back, which means it's going to be an ad hoc decision. Because again, if the expectation is if all health experts and the entire government has to have a foolproof plan, I think that's an unreasonable state because of the pandemic. We're learning as we go, and as a society, the adaptation has to go as we learn what the variants are, what conditions, and what new information we have. And that is what I would say the current state of what being resilient is: the ability to adapt and adjust.
And going on this, I think one of the most important points to note is that we have to learn how to open safely, and we have to learn how to live with the virus. So I am a proponent of lifting the borders of interstate travel. I am a firm believer that we should not have any form of interstate travel. But there is a caveat there in what I say.
We should not have interstate travel, or we should not have interstate travel restrictions?
We should not have any interstate travel restrictions. So I am a big proponent of that. We should not have any movement restrictions. But my caveat is this: we should make sure that there are no restrictions once the public has understood how to live with the virus, which means that when you move from state to state, you understand the responsibility that you carry moving from state to state. So when you look at the recent grouses, when the defense minister announced that interstate travel restrictions will still be applied during Hari Raya, what were the comments given by a lot of the public? I would like to go back, and the first thing I'm going to do, I want to go back and see my family members. I want to do this, I want to do that. So you see that the first thing that would happen if you actually were to lift it up, they would actually go out and surge into their family homes and perhaps create other clusters, which means that they still do not understand how to live with the virus and meet their parents, go through interstate travel in a safe manner. And until we learn how to do that, I don't think interstate travel can actually be done safely.
All right.
So this is what Shankar was going on, how we should actually learn to live with the virus. Because the simple question is this, right? Shiao, imagine that the virus is here for the next 5 years. Are we supposed to put all our frontliners guarding the interstate borders for the next 5 years, where we don't allow any form of travel? Definitely at one point, and I believe it's somewhere during this year, that we're going to be lifting everything. But when we lift everything, responsibility and the onus now is on us, on what are the responsibilities of individuals to contribute to opening up the community safely.
So these are decisions made by our decision makers, our policy makers, made by the authorities. But people need to have trust in the authorities to be able to then make these rational decisions. But at the same time, and it's something that Faye has pointed out in a comment as well, inconsistencies in SOPs and enforcement has led to a loss of trust and therefore this COVID fatigue. And trust. Shankar, you brought up the burger flair, right?
Right.
He was sadly fined 50,000 ringgit, and then you have a celebrity's whole family who was fined 60,000 collectively. So a lot of people are grousing about double standards and inconsistencies in enforcing the punishments. Right. How has that eroded trust?
I think it would be significantly affecting the individual, because he's probably perceiving it as the fact that why are there this double standard. But having said that, I think the Prime Minister just about 2 days back had come out and said, if you're going to administer a compound or a fine, be mindful and be respectful of what you're trying to do. What is the objective? If just because we've given a leeway to slap a $50,000 fine, and this guy is trying to make a living and trying to figure out the day-to-day functioning of his own life, be mindful on what that fine should be. And I think that was a very proactive statement by the Prime Minister just about 2 days back, which is, I think, the direction forward. If you want to look at a community or a society that's able to trust that whatever that is being done and being implemented is done for their benefit, and not necessarily just to curb freedoms or to control. And that is something that we have to be respectful of, as what Dr. Farhan has also said. There are no standard protocols, because whatever we are dealing with does not have a standard way of mutating or giving us a chart way or a path to handle. So that degree of flexibility and adjustment is necessary.
And we have a question here from Gabriel, and I'm going to post this to Dr. Farhan because it's quite specific to a sort of a health angle. He asks if temperature taking is still relevant, because he's seen where staff simply ask customers to wait a while before scanning again, or where temperature scanners are perhaps parked under air cons. I mean, basically, is there still a need to be scanning for temperatures at establishments where we're going?
Okay, let me pose this question back to the person. If you scan your temperature and you already got a high temperature, do you think that it's responsible for you to enter that premise, knowing what the whole aspect of taking temperature actually is supposed to do? Can you imagine if we do things because of other people and we're not doing it for the responsibility of what is expected of us? So what I mean by this, you take temperatures not for the shop or for the shop lots or for the mall. You take the temperature, it's actually for you. So if you suddenly have a high temperature, why not you take the proactive step by not entering the premise? Tell the people that, look, I'm sorry, I cannot come in. I've just recorded a high temperature. Perhaps I should get myself tested. Because why? Because out of the 1,000 of people who actually use the scanner, I am the 1,001th person who actually has a high temperature reading. Perhaps I can be a potential COVID patient, and I can be a potential super spreader that can spread it to the next 1,000 people who are in the same vicinity. Now, the responsibility is on us. Rather than asking whether its use, is it adequate or should it be done or not, but rather understand why it's there for. I think a lot of this questions posed by difficulty, or we talk about inconveniences. We say that the government has caused severe inconvenience to the people. The moment you think it's inconvenience to the people, that means you still have a big gap in understanding that it's not inconvenience, but it's actually to help you as a people, to help you as an individual, to ensure that you understand your responsibility and what are the steps that you need to do to prevent the pandemic. So when you log into My Sejahtera, when you log it into the QR codes, the information is not for the government. The information is for you. So that's why it's being stored only on your phone, and that's to keep privacy, so that people don't say the government is tracking them, but rather that the privacy is for you, so that if you are actually found to be positive, that you know who were the interactions that you had with for the past 14 days. So scanning is not for the government. Scanning is for you to have a sense of responsibility for you to be able to conduct contact tracing. So I think that's the biggest point that we have to understand. And the pandemic fatigue occurs because we think that all these things are to inconvenience the people and not to help the people.
But we have Tania who's sharing that Tania feels that the public hasn't reached a level of maturity and awareness and understanding, referring to, what you were talking about earlier about movement restrictions, but generally, I think Tania is relating to the lack of maturity and that responsibility that you've been talking about. So, Shankar, if we were to assume that may explain a significant proportion of our population,
Right.
that lack of maturity, coming back to it again. What
Right.
kind of messaging could help to encourage behavior change among those who perhaps still need that guidance?
Right. I think probably what we need to look at is in the context of a needs basis. Now, as an individual, as a human, so to speak, what are my needs? I guess the two core needs that for me would stand out is I need to feel safe. Number two, I need to feel connected, whether it's to my family or my larger fabric of society. These are the two core needs I think that are being threatened or seemingly being threatened at this point. So people are struggling with these two needs, the need to feel safe and the need to feel connected. Now, then the question becomes is, in this new normal or this redefinition of normal that I exist in, how do I feel safe and how do I feel connected? And if I do feel safe and if I do feel connected, does that change my psychological state and how I would see things? And I think this would be the two things that we probably need to look at: safety and connectedness. And of course, I can't enjoy the kind of safety and connectedness that I enjoyed before and a year back, but I have to engage in it differently. And how do I go about doing that would be where I think the priorities need to lie at. Because we can't take the need to feel safe or the need to feel connected from us. And that's what we're struggling with, or at least we feel suffocated or it's being threatened.
Yes, or it's being denied us, and hence that lashing out, behaving in ways that we actually inherently know we shouldn't. We've got quite a number of comments of people just sharing their thoughts about coping or why people are feeling this pandemic fatigue. But I want to address one that's a specific question. So Adrian is asking, and I'll post this to you, Dr. Farhan. People are not wearing masks when they jog or run in parks or exercise in the gym. Is this a risk worth taking to stay active and fit, Dr. Farhan?
Okay, number one, the safest place for you to be is in an open space. That is the safest place for you to be is an open space. So the risk, if you actually get into a closed off area, the risk becomes 40 times higher. Okay, 40 times higher in an enclosed space. So if you're outside and you're staying fit and you're doing your jogs and you're doing all these healthy lifestyles, you will be safe if you follow your physical distancing. So don't join a peloton, don't join a marathon. Rather, you can exercise with the individuals in your family, 2 or 3 people. And if you see a congregation of people, try to avoid. Now, it's safe if you practice what's being told to you. But here's something that I would like to draw, because I think this is something that's very key. So I'm sure you've seen these pictures where a group of cyclists, they start off in individual small groups, but end up on a hill and they take pictures together and it suddenly becomes a large group. So this is what I mean by people actually knowing what is expected of them, but yet choosing to ignore it. Because why? Because at that moment, everybody's doing it, so why not? So if it's safe for me because I'm doing sports, that means I cannot get COVID when I'm doing sports. But you have to do it in a safe manner. And when I see those things, it makes me really, really sad, because in the end, you ask yourself, do these people actually understand why they are doing it? Or are they just doing it just for the sake of not getting fined? Which brings us back to a full circle, getting back to our first point just now. So yes, you can jog. That's the straight answer. Open spaces are much more safer than indoor spaces. And yes, it's always worth it to keep yourself healthy, because our biggest fear from the public health perspective is if people get themselves stuck in the house, we see that they cook 5, 6, 8 meals a day because they have nothing else to do. And it's a big fear for us because we don't want obesity rates to climb. We don't want people to have sedentary lifestyles. We want you to still stay healthy. And it's very important, because don't tell me that you won't be able to jog for the next 3 to 5 years if the pandemic is here for the next 3 to 5 years. But you must learn on how you can do these things safely.
Now, vaccination is seen as sort of the next step in getting us through and better protected through this pandemic. But I think, Dr. Farhan, the next challenge is getting people to continue safe behaviors after they've been vaccinated. I can just picture people showing their bandaged arms and whipping off their masks, right? What challenge do you foresee, and how do we continue that messaging?
In all honesty, I honestly think that the 3Cs and 3Ws should be practiced even without the pandemic. You're talking about washing your hands regularly, keeping yourself safe. Even without the pandemic here, this should have always been our normal, right? And when we talk about interactions, about crowded spaces, we know that not only COVID can be transmitted in a crowded spaces. There can be so many things that can go wrong in a crowded space. You're talking about influenza, you're talking about tuberculosis, so many different diseases that actually already readily available. Now, the second thing that we talk about is that if you are sick, don't get yourself to public spaces. Don't get yourself outside. Stay home. So don't you think that this is really something that should have always been the case? But yet we do not practice it even prior to the pandemic. But right now, what we're trying to say is that don't get yourself too close, because imagine if you're in the LRT, you have to keep your physical distancing. Don't you think that should have always been the case? Because in a public area, it's not always proper for us to be too cramped up into crowded space, right? Because it's just uncomfortable for everyone. So I think that it is not so much of just because of the pandemic, this is what we should be doing. Perhaps we should look at it as perhaps this should have always been our norm prior to the pandemic.
All right. And speaking of the 3Ws and the 3Cs, Evelyn has commented that people may practice the 3Ws strictly, but it's the 3Cs that are difficult, especially when we meet each other, when we meet colleagues and friends and family members, and things like the crowded spaces, the close contact. That does seem to be the biggest challenge right now as we're looking at these high waves of cases. So Shankar, from an individual perspective, then we keep hearing 3Cs, 3Ws, we keep hearing SOPs, but right. How do we keep pandemic fatigue at bay? What can we do to mind ourselves how to become lax?
I think that the important aspect is, and if it's happening between close friends and family members, I think the most important thing to be mindful of, if I deeply care about you and I'm concerned about you, are my actions that I'm engaging with or facilitating is in the best interest of you? And that, I think, is what we need to be mindful of. If I'm going to engage you with a hug or and some degree of close contact, and if I'm not conscious of the risk that I may be carrying with me or the risk that I may cause to you, then that becomes what we need to look at specifically, because family, friends, there is a deeper sense of connection and a stronger relationship. And in my attempt to preserve those bonds, I also should be mindful that your health, safety, and well-being is my responsibility.
So instead of thinking, you are my friend or relatives, therefore it's safer to commingle with you, it should be, right. You're my friend, my relative, a loved one. I Correct. Should be keeping you as safe as possible.
Exactly. I have a responsibility to you the way and how I choose to connect with you, because I care for you or I love you or I'm concerned about you. So that is an important factor, I feel.
All right. Maybe just a brief wrap-up message from each of you. Dr. Farhan?
I think that is a really good thing to end the session with, is that you are not doing this for yourself. You're doing this for the people you love. And if you love the people around you, if you love your friends, by not rubbing cheeks, you're showing more love and affection to them. By not shaking their hands, you're showing that you love them. By not hugging your parents, it means that you truly, truly care about how they are and about their health. And I think that's a really good note to end. You're not doing this for you, but you're doing it for everyone else around you.
Right.
And Shankar?
I would basically say the question of this new normalcy requires you to connect and love people in this way. And that is what we need to appreciate, because at the end of the day, that's what we're building, a community. And in building a community, there is collective responsibility. And caring for a community at this period of time, if it means this, then this is what we should engage in. That's what I would say.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for everything that you've shared with us today. I've been speaking to Assistant Professor Dr. Farhan Rusli and Shankar Thiruchelvam. I hope you've enjoyed as much as I have.
Thank you. Thank you for having us aboard.
Thank you for having us both. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, now for the rest of you watching, do stick around because now it's quiz time. So this is a special Kahoot quiz that we're running for you. Go to kahoot.it. That's in the website you can see in the slide right there, and key in the pin code that you can see there, 1354229. And then you'll be asked to enter your email address. Make sure you use a valid email, and then enter your name as well. So if you can do that right now, kahoot.it, the pin code is 1354229, followed by your email address and your name. So the way this quiz will be run, there will be 3 rapid fire questions for you to answer, multiple choice or true and false. The fastest person to answer the quiz questions, to get all of them right as well, will win a lucky prize. The prize will be a touch and go voucher as well as BFM merchandise. So I'm seeing the names popping in now. We'll just wait for a while for everyone to get in. So this will be on top of the other lucky draw prize that you'll get to win. That separately is a Samsung Galaxy Fit 2 courtesy of AIA Vitality, and that one you can be in the running to win it when you download the e-sharing kit from the link provided in the comments. Just fill out a very simple form with some information for us and you'll be in the running to win. All right, names are still coming in for the Kahoot quiz, so we'll wait for everyone to log in and join before we begin. Once again, the fastest person to answer all 3 quiz questions correctly will win. Only one winner, so make sure your fingers are poised over the correct answers. You'll get to win a touch and go voucher and BFM merchandise. Okay, are you ready? Get set. Shall we start? Go! All right, and first question coming up is, let's see. And here we go. What is the recommended spacing for physical distancing between people? And you have 4 options there. They are 1 to 2 meters, or 1 to 2 feet, or 1 to 2 inches, or lastly 1 to 2 centimeters. 4 options for you to choose from. What is the recommended spacing for physical distancing between people to stay safe during this pandemic? Have you clocked in your answers? We are ending this question. And the correct answer is 1 to 2 meters. And we've got almost everyone who got the answer correct right there. And let's move on to the next question now. Which of these scenarios presents the highest risk for COVID-19 transmission? Is it an outdoor and crowded space? Is it if you're outdoors and alone? Is it an indoors and crowded space? Or if you're indoors and alone? This is a bit tricky, but you've got another 15 seconds to think about it and click the correct answer. Which of these presents the highest risk for COVID-19 transmission? If you were listening to a webinar, you'd get the answer, of course. I'm very sure Dr. Farhan talked about it. And time is up. The correct answer is indoors and crowded, of course, closed, confined spaces with a lot of people. And again, most of you got that correct. And finally, we'll move on to our last question. This is a true or false question. COVID-19 spreads through respiratory droplets. Is that true or false? I think many of you would be well familiar with this after a year of living with the pandemic and hearing and seeing all the educational messaging from the Ministry of Health, from all the health experts as well, about how COVID-19 is spread. Here's a tip. It's the reason why we are encouraged to wear face masks, or why we have to wear face masks especially. And time's up. Correct answer is true. COVID-19 does spread through respiratory droplets. Again, most of you got that correct. And that's the end of the quiz. So let's tally up the scoreboard. and see who won. Coming in at third place is Han. And coming in at second place is I. But first place is what we want to pay attention to. And the winner is Gab. So Gab, you are the lucky winner. You got all the answers correct. You've been paying attention to the webinar as well as, of course, all the information that's been shared about COVID-19. Congratulations, Gab. So do contact our BFM events team with your full name and contact details to redeem your prize. So our BFM event team's email will be in the comments section, so you can contact them. And of course, use your email address that you used earlier when you registered for the Kahoot quiz. For the rest of you, don't be disappointed. There's another prize waiting for you, as I've been mentioning throughout the webinar. If you download the e-sharing kit, where the link is provided in our comments, you'll be in the running to win a Samsung Galaxy Fit 2, courtesy of AIA Vitality. And it's a cool kit. I hope you will find it fun as well as useful, especially in the context of the topic that we've been discussing today about pandemic fatigue. Now, before we go, our next webinar is happening on Friday, the 28th of May, also at 12 o'clock. And we'll be discussing what parents need to know about raising digital natives, something really relevant for parents and caregivers raising kids and teenagers in this day and age. There will be another lucky draw prize for the webinar as well. And don't forget the grand prize at the end of the whole series, a Samsung Galaxy Watch Active 2 worth 999 ringgit, courtesy of AIA Vitality. You'll have to watch all our webinars, participate, download all the e-sharing kits in order to be in the running for that grand prize. And finally, we'd love to hear from you, so give us some feedback. You can fill out the form in our comments section. Tell us whether you found the webinar useful and how we can improve the experience for you. So we'll see you next month.